says, okay, let's do it your way, Larry. Brock gets the start week 1, and he starts struggling. Do we ride with Brock until the wheels fall off? How long is that leash? That's a good question. Does the 8 games played afford him a full season no matter what? No.
I don't think so either.
No. It affords him all 4 quarters of the opener, but it doesn't afford him 8 games. No. I would say, well, it really kind of depends. Why is he struggling? Is he struggling because he can't, his arm strength is noticeably lesser? Or is he struggling because the 49ers fall behind because their defense is getting ripped and here comes TJ Watt and it's jailbreak because they're down, they lose connection on the scoreboard and McKivitz is getting roasted by TJ Watt and then living in the backfield. And this, I mean, you got to remember this, the Steelers are like 8-1, coach, in the last 9 week 1 games at Heinz Field. So they're going to roll into that game with all the momentum.
They won last year on the road at Cincinnati, went in there and beat Cincinnati, sacked Joe Burrow 7 times. And then the year before that, they went into Buffalo when I think Buffalo was a top 3 favorite preseason to win the Super Bowl. And they went into Buffalo with Ben Roethlisberger a few months removed from Tommy John and beat him. So
Tomlin's a great coach and he gets his team ready to play. If you beat the Steelers, it's because you're the better team. They don't typically beat themselves.
They did against the Niners.
They have. I mean, I'm not saying they never have, but you know what I'm saying? I think Tomlin has his guys. I think Tomlin's Steelers are kind of like Shanahan's Niners from the standpoint of I hardly ever watch them where at the end of the game, I'm like, the Niners no-showed or the Steelers emotionally no-showed. Yeah. Steelers don't, Niners don't. These teams show.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it, right? That 2019 Steelers team was not good at all. And they came into Levi's against a Niners team that was still finding its feet, but coming off the confidence of just hammering Cincinnati in week 2. And they gave them an absolute dogfight with Mason Rudolph, who only Pittsburgh likes for whatever reason because he's one of the worst quarterbacks that's employed by the NFL. But they keep employing him for whatever reason. And so, yeah, they're really, really good. I do think.
How would you answer this one, though? Larry, yeah, it's a good question because it's a scenario that we have not painted yet.
I think it comes down to results, and here's why. And I'm going to present a similar scenario that we saw, but there is a distinction, and I'm going to mention the distinction as well to the 2 scenarios. If you remember in 2019, Jimmy Garoppolo had that god-awful camp when he returned from his ACL injury, right? The 5 straight pick practice. The second preseason game against Denver on Monday Night Football was one of the worst preseason games you'll ever see. That was horrible. And he had a rough camp and he did not look very good. And Mike Silver and Chris Mortensen both reported separately at different times during that offseason that Nick Mullins was a guy that, Shanahan preferred how he ran his offense versus Garoppolo, and that there would be a quick trigger on Garoppolo if he played poorly. The funny part is to open that season, the first 8 games of that season when the 49ers started 8-0, Garoppolo did actually play poorly. He was not good in the first 8 games of that season. Frankly, he was bad, and they were winning in spite of him a lot of those games. And they did win in spite of him, and the Niners didn't have a quick trigger with him. And
what season are you talking about?
This is 2019, start of 2019, right?
The Super Bowl year.
Yeah. He played well, very well in the second half of the season. I'll give that to him. He played horrible in the first half of that season, and they didn't have a quick trigger with him. Now, it is a little bit different replacing Jimmy Garoppolo 2 years removed after you made him the highest paid quarterback in the NFL, and you're replacing him with Nick Mullins, who's an undrafted free agent, right? There is political dynamics with that aren't necessarily as much in play because Brock Purdy at the end of the day is a 7th-round, second-year quarterback. None of these guys are making that much more money than the other where politics might give them an advantageous role. But I do think if the Niners are winning, even if the quarterback is playing poorly and let's say it's Trey Lance. Let's say the Niners start 6-0 and Trey Lance is playing poorly. I think they would let it ride with Trey Lance. Now, if they go on a 2-game slide, I think the trigger would be quick, in that situation. Or if it's Brock Purdy and he's playing terribly, but they win 6 in a row, start 6-0, I think they would let it ride with him, but be aware that he's playing poorly. Same thing with Sam Darnold, And
So
then,
you're basically saying the results of the
yeah,
game determine
yeah,
everything.
yeah,
So
yeah. I
you
think
could
they could
play
play poorly
poorly
and
in
keep
a
their roster.
loss,
Exactly.
but if you play poorly and you win, you get another opportunity. You could play well in a win and keep your job. You can play poorly in a win and keep your job. But if you lose, that's what you're saying. That's when you start
I
to
think so. I think so.
I would say this. I would say that it really depends on if they win or lose. I do agree. If you win, you could always chalk it up to something. But if you inherently see a lesser prospect, like let's say he can't make the deep out throw, and you're seeing a guy that doesn't look the same, I think he's got 2-game
But you're
leash.
you're you're going in a different direction, right? You're going to him being physically not fully back. And that I think would then be a responsibility on the 49ers to protect him from himself and get him off the field in that case. But I think we're just thinking that he comes back, he's the same exact guy and he plays poorly, right? In that case, I think he can get away with playing poorly as long as the Niners are winning because they'll keep giving him opportunities to figure it out the same way they did for Garoppolo in 2019. But if they start 0-4, right, Larry, and he's playing horrible, Trey Lance will be in for sure, or Sam
So
Darnold will
you're
be in
saying
for sure.
4 games?
Not 4 games. I'm just giving a random
No, I know,
example.
but I wasn't sure. Let's just say he plays. Let's say Brock starts week 1, plays poorly, and they lose. I think Brock starts week 2.
Yeah, 100%.
If they play poorly and lose, that's who they play in week 2. Giants.
By the way, I think that's the case for whomever starts week 1. So if Trey Lance
I
starts
agree.
week 1, he plays poorly and loses, I think he will start week 2.
I
If
agree.
Sam Darnold starts week 1, he plays poorly and loses, I think he will also start week 2. I think that applies
I
for all
agree.
three. Yeah.
I think that the speed of the league as far as making moves. The one thing with coaches, there's more coach. It's like we need more than the information you gave, because we also don't know in this scenario how did Trey and Sam play in the preseason.
Right.
And I think that matters, because if those guys, let's say Brock is the starter week 1, and those guys in the preseason were a circus, I think he gets a month. If
Oh,
Brock,
okay. So you're saying it's going to be dictated more on how strongly they feel about whichever quarterbacks are behind the guy that ends up starting.
let's say we watch the preseason and Brock and Trey and Darnold all ball out, Brock's still your week 1 starter. If he loses week 1 and plays poorly, I think he probably starts the second game. But I think it ends right there. That's where if he plays poorly in week 2 and loses, and Trey and Sam both had a great preseason, I think in week 3 they would make up some form of an excuse and go to one of the other 2 guys.
I could see that. I could see that as well. But I could also see the scenario where they give him 4, 5, 6 games, even if he's playing poorly. As long as they don't start like 0-6, if they're 3-3, I could still see the scenario where they give that to him. And by the way, I could see that again for all 3 of these quarterbacks. Like I could see all 3 of them having a quick trigger if they start week 1, and I could see all 3 of them be given a long rope to start. It's really circumstantial, really. Now that you mention it, right? It just depends on how things end up playing out throughout the entirety of this camp and where he is physically. That's going to because I think what you said is right on. It all depends on how the other guys are playing for them to have that trigger and have the confidence to get off of it.
And also think about it this way. If those 2 other quarterbacks play really well in the preseason, there'll be more public pressure to play them.
Right, exactly.
And that will also factor into this equation. So that would be how I would answer that. But it's the one thing that I'm from talking to Shanahan through the years that I get a sense of is that, especially early in the year, lots of head coaches are really reticent about making changes at quarterback, because they know if you overreact to a loss and pull the quarterback and then you lose again,
You kind of kill your season because you can't go back to him.
Yeah, it's like, and you don't want to burn through all your quarterbacks in the first month and have nobody, feel like it's also there becomes a very what's the word? I mean, kind of an unsettled room.
Yeah.
If you're just nobody knows who the leader is because everybody's one loss away
I
from losing their
agree.
job.
And that's why I hate quarterback competitions, because I think they all end up in the scenario that you described. I think it always ends up that for that team. But I also think Shanahan has shown in his time that he's very cognizant of that particular dynamic, right? Like, we've known he wanted to get rid of Jimmy Garoppolo for how long? But he continued that dynamic because he understood that the team believed in Jimmy Garoppolo and they needed that. So I do think, Shanahan is all over that, like you mentioned as well.